Giving out leaflets. That's all we knew. There was a man by the name Marcus. I don't know if you heard of him. He was the craziest vegetarian. He only lived on nuts and raisins. That's it. And he was wearing rubber shoes. And he was the craziest anarchist we ever had. He was the one that used to write. But the whole work was, for us, was giving out literature. We were going to lectures. There was an awful lot of doings at that time. Labor Temple, 40th Street was a very busy place. And Goldman used to lecture there. Beukman used to be there. Whoever was in Durant, William Durant, he used to lecture there. Everybody used to lecture there. That was a beautiful place. We used Friday night. Out we got to the lecture. It was never a Friday night that we didn't go to hear a lecture. Saturday night we had a dance. But that was when we were in your age. At this point, we don't need a dance.
I mean, life wasn't all dull for these anarchists. It wasn't all the sweatshop, although many hours of their day were spent working. They had their evenings. The amazing thing is they had enough energy in the evening to attend lectures. And for the one day that they were free from their jobs, they would go on an anarchist picnic, or they would go to an anarchist dance. The sorts of dance they had were the Beurenbau. Beurenbau means the peasant dance, where they would all dress up as peasants and apples would hang from the ceiling and they'd try to bite into them, and they would hold raffles to raise money for the cause. The Arrestantenbälle, the Beurenbälle, these are the arrested balls, the peasant balls, which were held to raise funds for the prisoners under the Tsar. And they sent large sums of money. These working people who would have to save pennies to contribute to the movement and to subscribe to their newspapers would send substantial sums of money to Tsarist Russia through the Anarchist Red Cross. They founded an Anarchist Red Cross in the years before the First World War. So I say it was a whole world. In the 1960s and 1970s, we heard a great deal about the libertarian counterculture, which was counterposed to the American culture of statism, of militarism. Well, this had already evolved in the 1880s, 90s, and in the decades before the First World War.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the 7th annual reunion of the Friends of the Ferrer Modern School. We've got a pretty good program set up for this afternoon.
This is a reunion of the Ferrer School. It's our 7th one, and about 100 to 200 of us come together every year, and there are very warm refreshments of our memories and of our friendships as we gather this way. No one has lost any interest in coming each year.
What was the Ferrer School? Was it an anarchist experiment or an educational experience? Or?
The Ferrer School was an anarchist experimental school, inspired by the work that Francisco Ferrer had been doing in Spain until he was martyred. And anarchists in America and in many countries organized such free schools where the children went to school and did not have to do anything that was set out by a teacher, but did the things they wanted to do.
The school as it was run, and it was run differently, often at different times throughout the years that it was in existence, but the period that I remember, there was a great attempt to keep apart politics and religion and everything else from the school. The school was run by the kids, more or less, with the adults. It was they had a common meeting, and we ran the school. You didn't have the kind of generation gap which we've seen in recent years, because there was nobody you were fighting against, in effect. The teachers were there, and they usually were called by their first name, and they were one of us all. You weren't forced to go to classes. You weren't forced to have marks or anything else. You could decide what you wanted to do, so that the authority came from not only yourself, but the whole student and school community.
The idea was that if children were removed from a regimented and demanding society which deformed them and put into a free ambiance, they would develop naturally, and they would naturally learn as long as there was any opportunity to learn. Of course, living was learning, and learning was something that children naturally did.
most people who've heard of the term anarchism, it's almost a synonym for terrorist. The anarchist is a wild-eyed, wild-haired person with a black cape, with a dagger in one hand, a bomb sputtering already in the other. Well, it is true that there was a terrorist element in the anarchist movement. A small minority, the vast majority of anarchists were very gentle and very idealistic people, and in fact frowned upon unmotivated terrorism and violence. The socialists would have nothing to do with this sort of thing, and they rejected terrorism altogether, whereas the anarchists tended at least to defend the terrorists even when they didn't agree with them. Incidentally, I don't want to go to the other extreme to deny that there were any terrorists among the anarchists. What I'm emphasizing is it was a small minority. That is, there were a handful of individuals who carried out terrorist acts, a small segment of the movement who supported them. A fairly large segment sympathized with these terrorists whom they saw as avengers and deliverers, you see. People who were doing propaganda not by the word, as in the Freie Arbeiterstimme, but by the deed, to inspire people to act and to make a revolution.
In alle Klassen, wo man geht, hört man Sabastowkes. Jinglach, Mädlach, Kind und Cage, wo sind Pumpribowkes?
Jinglach, Mädlach, Kind und Cage, wo sind Pumpribowkes? Genug schon wieder Horven, genug schon Borgenleien. Macht das Sabastowke, lo mir Brüder sich befreien. Macht das Sabastowke, lo mir Brüder sich befreien. Brüder und Schwester, lo mir sich geben die Hände. Lo mir Nikolai, können zerbrechen die Wände. Und Schwester, lo mir gehen zusammen, lo mir Nikolai kennen, begraben mit der Mame. Hey, hey, da neue Polizei, da neue Sache der Scham jetzt, Brasse.
Nächten hat geführt, hat weggelemist, heute ist geboren, ein Kapitalist.
Hey, hey, da neue Polizei, da neue Sache der Scham jetzt, Brasse.
In 1919, when the Communist Party started in the United States, it was a terrible blow to the Yiddish anarchists and to the readers of the Freie Arbeiterstimme. What happened is this: just as in Soviet Russia, the communists used anarchist slogans. When, for instance, Lenin promulgated the slogan of the factory to the workers, the land to the peasants, all power to the Soviets, this is pure and simple anarchism. Remember, he never mentioned in all these three slogans not the state, not the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, when the anarchists listened to these slogans, they were attracted to them. So here in the United States, just as as in Russia, anarchists worked with the Bolsheviks at the very beginning. But here, an interesting thing happened. Yanovsky, that clear-headed guy, said the Bolsheviks will never introduce these slogans, will never practice what they preach. This is just a lie. It's not true. They're not going to give all the power to the They're not going to give all the power to the Soviets. They're not going to give the factories to the workers. They're not going to give the land to the peasants. Everything will belong to the state. And he was against joining the Bolsheviks, against joining the communists here. And many of the young anarchists, most of the young anarchists, the most active, broke away from the Yiddish anarchists, broke away from the Freie Arbeiterstimme and weakened it. And they formed the backbone of the Communist Party in the United States.